presentation by Mark from Romanowski. Used to be from up there. But first and foremost, I want to make sure that everyone understands in this room that their input in the direction of St. E's and what transpires will be driven by the community. We said that before, and so I will say it again. It is a great opportunity for the city. Are there risks? There's always a risk, but I think this is a huge opportunity for us to make something worthwhile at St. E's that will be beneficial to everybody in this room. I want to introduce Bob Schofield. Bob Schofield with MEHS. You're aware of the fact that between the City of Utica, IDA, and MEHS, we sung an RFP to look at the ingredients to making this a financially feasible project by giving the tools for a developer, which it's a very in-depth, as Mark will get into. But I want to assure everybody tonight, as you see the presentation, then we will break off and we'll have little areas that you can talk, and every member of this team will be available to ask some questions. There will not be an open mic, but we will circulate throughout, so you'll be able to talk to everyone in reference to this. So without further ado, Mark.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. Good evening, folks. My name is Mark Romanowski. I'm the project attorney. My practice is focused on redevelopment, and in particular, I've done several hospital reuse projects across the state. You'll also find that other members of the team have similar experience.
Could you speak up?
Yeah, sure, no problem. Is that a little better?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So our project development team has a lot of experience in doing redevelopment of hospital campuses. We've been retained by the hospital, the city, and the IDA to analyze the site and develop a plan for what makes the most sense going forward. As the mayor mentioned, tonight's the first step in that process. What we're going to be doing tonight is first sharing with you our initial analysis. So our initial analysis included economic viability, opportunities, looking at the physical plan. What does the physical nature of the site lend itself to? What's good about it, what's bad about it, that type of piece. We looked at zoning, land use, and then we also looked at it from an architectural and design standpoint. And what you'll see tonight is an analysis of that sort of this first phase that we've been through. Anything that we show you tonight is meant to be information gathering from our side and sharing it with you guys. The second part of the meeting, so after we go through the presentation up here, the part that we really want your participation in is what we call the gallery walk. So around the room, you'll see that we have boards that have different components related to the project. And we'd like your input one-on-one during that process to get the feedback so we can start to gather that. Our role is information gathering so that we can help move forward with the development analysis. So this is the first of what's going to be several other meetings. So tonight is first step one. With me tonight, we've got Mike and Morgan over there. Mike's going to talk about economics. Morgan's from the design team, far more creative than any of us. So she'll be here to talk about general design things. Sarah's the one that's keeping everything organized tonight. You can thank her for this looking as good as it does tonight, because the rest of us couldn't do that. And Frank is also they're both with Fisher, I'm sorry, they're both with Fisher. And Frank's with the planning team. So Frank will talk about that particular piece. So we're going to get into the details. Again, as we said, we ask that you hold your questions for afterwards when we're all available to you to answer your questions. We'll be taking notes and that type of thing. So that's what's going to be a valuable part of that gallery walk piece. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Frank to get us kicked off. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mark talked about the format of the meeting tonight. We're going to do the presentation, we'll run through that, and then as Mark pointed out, we'll do this gallery walk, we'll be taking notes, we'll be interacting with all of you to get comments, feedback on what we've presented so far. Mark mentioned the project partners here, City of Utica, Mohawk Valley Health System, and the Utica IDA are all partners in the project, all have a role in helping lead this project. The consultant team. So we have, I'm with Fisher Associates. My name is Frank Armento. I'm planning group manager at Fisher. We're looking at the planning aspects of the project and the sort of character of the overall campus. Architectural Resources is an architecture firm that does the sort of design side of things. They'll be getting into the master planning and concept design phase a little bit later. Rob Fallsgraf on the legal side, and then the MRB group is doing the market study and financial feasibility analysis. Financial feasibility analysis is to come, so that's a future task that we'll be getting into. So this is the site. There are actually 3 tax parcels here. It's a 21-acre site. I think many of you are familiar with the campus, but there are 3 tax parcels here. But we're looking at all 3. They're all affiliated with all Mohawk Valley Health System entities that own these 3 parcels. So some of the project goals and objectives, when we started out looking at this site, there were several things that we were trying to accomplish that was sort of laid out for us right from the beginning. And that's to envision, finance, and facilitate context-sensitive reuse of this 21-acre campus. The city's vision for reuse of the campus is a modern development that works for residents, businesses, and for the posterity of the city. One other point, the College of Nursing, MVHS is committed to the College of Nursing staying on the campus and continuing to operate. So that is a goal, an objective here that we wanted to share with you. Some guiding principles for the work that we're doing. Retain and enhance and adaptively reuse the historic buildings that are on the campus. There's a component of the Genesee Street frontage looking at a potential mixed-use opportunity along Genesee Street consistent with the rest of the uses along Genesee. The balance of the property can provide a mix of residential development with a mix of styles. Scale style architecture reflective of the surrounding neighborhoods is very important. So that context and making sure that the campus works with the surrounding neighborhoods. Looking at sustainable design, the urban canopy, particularly the perimeter of the site, which is very dense canopy. Preservation of natural areas that exist on the campus. And quality design and construction for the new construction that may be part of the mix. So our strategy is very simple. This is just really boiling it down. Right now we're in the phase of analyzing the physical and economic options for the site. So really, a lot of the work that we've been doing over the last several months is really digging into all of the information that was made available to us by the hospital system. Trying to figure out what's happening at the site, what has occurred before, what studies have been done, analyzing all that information.
Is there a way of turning the volume of that thing, of the speaker? Crank it up.
Is this any better?
Yeah.
I'll keep it up as close as I can.
Yeah, the folks in the back, give us a thumbs up if you hear us.
Can everybody hear me?
Thumbs up? Okay, thank you.
All right, so these 3 elements here to the study really just boil down to what we're charged with. The first being analyzing the physical and economic options of the site. And that's where we are. We're really looking at all of the information that was made available to us by the hospital, by the city, and taking a look at that information and using it to eventually develop some options for the site. Garnering public feedback, so this is the first meeting to do that. Looking at the preliminary work that we've done, and then a few months in advance, we'll be looking at more details. And then identifying a path forward to implement the plan. How do we actually do this? Our scope, the first step, one of the first steps is, as I mentioned, looking at all of this information that is available to us, but also doing a market study. Michael will talk about the market study in a bit. Our pre-renovation study is looking at all of the structures, the site, doing an environmental review, so there's a lot of materials that were provided to us, as I mentioned, and then a legal review, which is in Mark's court. The next phase, once we get past this public meeting, is to start a master planning process, taking your feedback and starting to actually develop some concepts, a more detailed master plan for the site, with some alternatives. So we'll be looking at a couple of different options that we'll explore a little bit later in the process. And that's where the concept planning comes into play. That's the more detail that you'll be seeing right now. You're looking at a lot of preliminary work. The financial and physical feasibility analysis is what we'll be getting into later as well. That's determining what's emerging as the concept for the site. Is that financially feasible, or is it physically feasible? Our neighborhood community outreach component, which is starting tonight, is important, and we're going to take your comments into account to develop some of these designs. And then implementation, so we'll be getting into the state environmental quality review process towards the end of the process, zoning analysis, preparing the full summary, master plan, and then there's an RFP component. Getting the RFP on the street to get the development community to actually push this forward. Public engagement. So we have a project steering committee with a number of individuals that are helping create the bridge between our team and the public. There's a stakeholder group of elected government officials and the common council members to review project details and to help us sort of vet some of the materials that we're developing. There'll be 2 public meetings tonight, and then in February is the next one we anticipate. And there's a couple of websites, one hosted by the City of Utica and the other by MPHS that will be posting information on in the future. So our project steering committee, composed of individuals from Mohawk Valley Health System, City of Utica, the Utica Industrial Development Agency, and Mohawk Valley Edge. So, site history, one of the things that really struck us when we first saw the campus was some of the historical value here. And that is, what emerged out of that was the State Historic Preservation Office actually determined some of the buildings on the site, including the main hospital building, as eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. The main building was built in 1915. Other buildings on the site built in the 1920s, and then some later additions to the campus between the 1950s and 1970s. As I mentioned, the State Historic Preservation Office determined that some of these buildings, including the main hospital, would be eligible for the National Register. And as you all know, the hospital ceased operations at the site in October. So some of the work that we did early on here was looking at existing conditions. Where does this site fit into the broader city? And one of the things we looked at was the amenities and all of the assets around this site that sort of feed into it, and the site feeding into all of the neighborhoods. So that we identified a lot of park spaces, a lot of assets, a lot of good connectivity to the site. So it's a really great site from a locational perspective. I talked a little bit about the cultural resources here. This is a board that the State Historic Preservation Office determined in terms of eligibility. We will be consulting with that office in the future to solidify where the state stands on eligibility of all the buildings on the site. We anticipate that some will be determined, some additional buildings will be determined to be eligible and some will not. So we'll be looking at that very closely. Some other additional observations that we made. I talked about this a little bit. Natural features, very good buffer around the perimeter of the site, but not a lot of environmental features brought in. The last boundary survey was done in the mid-1970s, so we are currently updating that. That'll help inform location, boundaries, and other real property features on the site. There was a phase 1 environmental site assessment done a couple of years ago, did not find any significant environmental concerns on the site. So that was important. There have been some asbestos surveys done in the buildings between 1994 and 2014. Really what was found is consistent with the age of the buildings. There's some asbestos and other materials in the buildings that are typical for the age of these buildings. Good utilities on the site. Certainly there would have to be some rework of utilities for any future use, but overall pretty good utilities and capacities. And then we'll have to do some additional analysis of these buildings as we go through the process, since the hospital is just relocated. And now Mike was going to talk about his results from the market study.
Good evening, everybody. I am going to speak as loudly as I possibly can, because if there's one thing I hate about a meeting, it's not being able to hear. We did ask if we could turn off the air handling units. We cannot. So, again, give me a thumbs up, thumbs down from the back if I get too soft, okay? Thumbs up. 2 other logistics. There are plenty of chairs for anybody who's standing in the back. If you'd like some, we got them right here. And I saw some miscreants coming in the side door here. If you did, please make sure you go and sign in so you get all the updates. All right? Okay, so now on to the market. My role in this project is the most boring. It's about finance and market. It's about how are we going to get this deal done in the private sector, right? The private sector is going to have to write a really big check to make this redevelopment happen. So I look at the market data and say, what is possible? What can get done? I had the good fortune a couple of years ago to work with the mayor on the Genesee Street DRI, I'm sure you guys all remember. And I met a lot of your developers, and I've heard a lot from the private sector development community about what the pricing is, what the market looks like, what's in demand, what's not in demand, what's possible, what's not. And all of that got incorporated into our analysis. So I'm sure as members of the public, you're not real interested in numbers, but I'm going to give you a couple. One is the city of Utica, from 2010 to 2013, grew in population by 4%. Oneida County shrunk by 2%. So you grew, the county shrunk. People are coming back into the city. Can you hear, sir? You can hear? Okay. So it's a very positive trend from a demographic point of view. You've had a number of decades of population decline. You're now starting to see the population come back. Very positive from a development point of view. Same thing with the number of households. Same thing with your projected population. Median household income. In the city, it's growing. It's going in the right trend, but it's lower than the average of the county. So if you combine those two things, people from the county coming into the city, and higher median incomes from the county coming into the city, it means you have better market fundamentals, right? And you start to see it now, today, in the development that's happening up on the Genesee Street corridor, further towards downtown, the north from here. It's possible to bring some of that development energy to this site in a particular way, and we'll describe how that's going to happen, or how that could happen. I also talked, there's a list here, I'm sure everybody in this room can read it, but I talked to a number of developers very recently, including a couple that aren't active right now in Utica. But when they heard about this project and they heard about the potential, they got interested. So again, these are all positive things we're hearing from the marketplace. Next slide, please. Oh, by the way, I want to mention Sarah from Fisher does not have a speaking role, but all of this is because of her. So any compliments go to Sarah. If you have any complaints, they go to Frank. Over there. Raise your hand, Frank. Over there. Okay, so what does this mean for you as a city and for you as South Uticans, if I can call you that, South Uticans, right? You have good, positive divergence from county trends. Your city's housing market is in transition. It's starting to really take off. I am actually based out of, my company's based out of Rochester, but I'm based out of Saratoga Springs, which is known for high prices. You're getting prices comparable right now to Saratoga on the rental side. I was shocked when I heard this. The city, we believe, can absorb many, many more market rate units before you hit saturation, okay? There is also demand on the affordable side. There's quite a few people that could use affordable units in addition to market rate units. So we found that. New high prices for rentals and sales, well, rentals really, and generally a positive view from developers. I'm going to skip all the charts, you're not interested in that. Can everybody still hear me? Okay, next chart, next
Slide.
Thank you. I get a little prompt up here. Okay, so we talked about what are the different reuses that could happen on site. Office, probably not a good reuse. The office market is terrible right now. Not just in Utica, everywhere upstate, the office market's terrible. The one thing that we could get is possibly some medical office. Obviously, it's a former medical facility, and there's the hospital nearby, the new hospital. So there could be a limited amount of medical office, but office in general is not great. Industrial, the pricing is good, but this is probably not a good site for industrial. I'm sure you guys can appreciate that, being residents. The only technically industrial use we can see here would be craft beverage manufacturing, which I'm sure is probably got mixed reviews, but a lot of people will be excited about that. Okay, we hear no. Retail pricing. Retail is not great right now. The retail pricing for rents is too low for new development. So it's probably not a market feasible use, except that we think of maybe a little bit on site that would work. Hospitality, that's hotels and lodging. You actually have a very good hospitality market, but this is not the site for a hotel. Institutional use, that could be anything from medical to a nursing home to a BOCES educational center. Those could go in this facility. But overall, residential will be the key to redeveloping this site. That's going to be the driver. Without contest, it is going to be the top driver of redevelopment. Next slide, please. So, nobody can read this slide, but I'll read it to you. We think that this site should be adaptively reused. Frank is going to go through, Frank and Morgan. Morgan, by the way, is from Architectural Resources, also responsible for a lot of the content you see here. They're going to go through a few concepts that we threw out there. But our adaptive reuse of a portion of the hospital building. And we think for it to be successful, you're looking at 200 residential units. And you can say to yourself, 200 seems like a lot. But compared to a hospital use, this is like a drop in the bucket. This is going to be hardly anything compared to an active hospital in terms of just daily activity. So 200 residential units. Most of those, probably almost all of them, are going to be market rate. And the way that what the market wants right now, so to speak, is mostly one-bedroom units. So about maybe 75% of them being one bedroom, about 25% being two bedroom. This is very typical and it's very in line with the market. Your target market is going to be two. Folks in this room, and no offense, but I see a lot of gray hair, I have it too. There's a lot of empty nester need, people that want to downsize from their single-family home and need a different type of unit that is adaptable to their needs. So empty nesters and young professionals would be the two primary targets for those units. Excuse me. In addition to the adaptive reuse of a portion of the hospital building, right on Genesee Street, we think a small-scale new build development could be possible. Ground floor would be split between retail in the front and behind it a little tuck under parking, and above that would be new build residential. It could be rentals, it could be condos, that's kind of to be determined. Not a huge number, but we could put some there. It'd be nice to kind of match the architectural style and flow of the rest of Genesee Street. There's another bullet point here, which is TBD, to be determined. You'll see on one of the schematics, or one of the illustrations, I should say, we toyed around with the idea, could we also put in some nice new build townhomes? And I talked to a developer, that's their specialty, and really the minimum number that we would have to get on the site for market feasibility is about 30 units of townhouse. Now, it could be more, but it had to be at least 30 to make something worthwhile to a developer to achieve. Now, those would be larger units. Those would be more like 3-bedroom, maybe even a few 4-bedroom units, right? And likely for sale, but they could be for rent as well. All of this is to be determined. And then finally, financially, to make this happen, we're going to need a good, solid public-private partnership. That is the city, the hospital, I'm pointing to Bob over here, the hospital itself, delivering the site, the city helping shepherd the process through, the IDA for its powers of tax abatement, and state and federal historic tax credits, and possibly some state assistance on site development. All of these things have to be drawn in to make this thing work. The numbers are hard when you're dealing with a site this big with this many square feet that exist today. But we believe that with the right combination of adaptive reuse and these things and some new build, we can get a developer interested. And I have had conversations with developers who have already expressed interest in this concept. So we feel pretty good that we're on the right track. And that's it for me. I know it's taken more than my allotted time, but I wanted to go through that and let you know where we're at. Now we're going to talk about some of the land use planning and legal issues that have to be addressed.
Thanks, Michael. I'll try to keep my voice up again. Anybody who can't hear us back there, thumbs down helps. So, a lot of what Michael just got done talking about is, can we make this work financially? In order for it to be redeveloped, it has to make economic sense. If it doesn't make economic sense, no one will touch it and the site will sit, which is the last thing anybody wants. The other part of it is permissibility. When a developer is looking at a site, they need to understand whether or not that is a project that they can get through the approval process. That community engagement like this, that they have a sense of it. So what we're doing is we're acting as a precursor. We're doing the due diligence in advance for potential developers to give them a picture of what the community wants. So this is a big part of it, and this helps us through that process. From a purely legal zoning perspective, the existing zoning is actually very flexible and perfect for a light mixed use type of development. Residential, retail, some commercial, institutional is a little tougher. I tamp that down. I don't think there's really a high likelihood of institutional unless it's educational. So the existing zoning allows that, it envisions that. It's also consistent up and down Genesee. This zoning is in place on Genesee already, so it's something the city has gone through and identified Genesee as an area for mixed use development. So that's the existing zoning. As part of the process, and Frank touched on it a little bit, we're going to be doing what's called the Generic Environmental Impact Statement, GEIS for short. The idea of that is to analyze the potential uses that we identify through this process and identify the potential impacts from those uses. Traffic, noise, cost, implications of infrastructure. All of that gets done part of the EIS process. It's a public process. It's a process that you guys will be participating in. We envision that first meeting on that process is a February meeting that Frank talked about. So that's part of this process, is to gather that information, take that information and analyze the options that are available and say, okay, what impacts are associated with the different spectrum of potential uses. So there's a part and parcel to that process called an alternative analysis process. And the alternative analysis will look at, okay, what's the broad spectrum of things that could be done here, and what are the different impacts from those different uses. And so that'll be part of the EIS process and part of our team's role. That's part of our job. That's part of our scope of work. Excellent. The next piece that we talk about is flexibility. This team here, we're here to make it easier for a future developer. We don't know who that developer is. We expect the developer to be chosen by an RFP process. We expect that the developer is likely to be a single large developer. We don't envision this being broken up. It doesn't lend itself to cohesive development. So it's going to be someone that has capability to take on a site of this magnitude and deliver a product at the level that we want. The RFP process will allow the team that's doing that choice, making the choice of the developer, to analyze their financial wherewithal, their capability to deliver and sustain the project. Their financial viability will be part of it, so it won't be, this site is too big for somebody that's just getting into development to do. It's just not going to happen. So this gives the community an opportunity to kind of vet that going in, so you know you're making a good choice in the development. So that's the legal piece. The other piece, Frank mentioned the survey. We were doing a perimeter survey because the survey we had is very old. So we did a perimeter survey that started identifying things. We're going to be looking, and I know there's a conservation easement. We've got our hands on it, looking at it, see how it affects redevelopment on the site. I will say, you'll see in some subsequent slides, I'm going to be stepping in for Morgan, who's far more talented, but her voice doesn't quite move a little bit like mine, so we can hear him back. But the initial thought that we had here by looking at this is we can actually keep the footprint tight. This doesn't require the expansion of the footprint. We don't need to edge out. We can stay within the footprint. There's opportunities. Number one, the future demand is going to be much lower on parking. All that surface parking that you see on the site, we don't need it. We just don't need it. So that allows us to shrink the footprint of the site, give more opportunity for green space, things of that nature. So it really lends itself to that. That should flip us into the next slide. A lot of this we covered at least briefly. We talked about the on-site buildings. We're generally in good condition structurally. Now, I know those of you that have been in the hospital probably walked around and said, how's this get turned into something else? That's what the creative people in the room help and can see. We see it as a very intriguing, historic structures, as very intriguing structures that, when essentially gutted back down to the walls, allow for the opportunity of creating unique space. So what we looked at is, well, what's the condition of the structures? Are they viable for redevelopment? Some things need to be fixed up. Parking garage in the back, structurally sound, but it's a little rough. So that's part of what we're looking at. The historic structures lend themselves to redevelopment. The newer structures do not. So the buildings in the back of the site, the newer additions, those are less likely to remain. They don't lend themselves to redevelopment. As Frank touched on, with the State Historic Preservation Office, the main hospital building, and critically, and you'll see that in the preliminary designs, the Great Lawn, I think is referred to. That was all deemed as part of the historic site. So we're very intrigued about the idea of recreating the Great Lawn. That was lost to parking. We don't need parking. So that's a great opportunity. We also have the nunnery that building is also identified as historic and Marion Hall. So those three buildings, or four that join together in the hospital complex, are all actually are listed as eligible for historic preservation designation. And then, you know, Michael's already talked about our last bullet point here regarding the market study that identified the demand for residential housing on the site at a density of about 200 units. We've already gone through, and there's been an environmental site assessment. Fortunately, the site from a ground standpoint doesn't show any history or environmental impacts to the site itself. The buildings absolutely will have asbestos, lead paint, things of those natures. That's normal in these buildings. There wasn't the asbestos survey and lead material survey that was done, didn't identify anything what we would characterize as out of the ordinary. So it didn't seem like an overly difficult task to deal with those particular issues. We talked about the parking garage. The parking garage, this team views as an opportunity, and it views it as an opportunity to eliminate surface parking lots. There's 500 spots in that parking garage. That means we don't need to have surface parking. There's enough parking in that parking garage to envision the development of the density we so far are starting to see make sense for the site. So that's an opportunity to restore old parking areas back to grass, restoring the front lawn. Those are given by the opportunity that the parking garage has. It's not the prettiest thing, that's got to get worked on, but it's structurally sound, so it does lend itself to being maintained. The School of Nursing, as we've talked about, would like to stay on site. They want to maintain their presence on the campus in their existing facility, and nothing about what we're proposing, means that needs to change. And then we've already talked about the mixed-use infill development along Genesee Street. Again, light retail that services residents in the neighborhood. That's the kind of retail we're envisioning. So the folks at AR, I'm not an architect. I went to architecture school and found that I couldn't draw, so I became a lawyer.
Okay.
But I really enjoy working on development projects, so I like the opportunity to speak about design concepts. So what Architectural Resources did is said, okay, let's look at the buildings on site. What buildings lend themselves to redevelopment? What buildings do not lend themselves to redevelopment? What do we want to restore? What type of amenities do you think you can provide on the site if you're re-envisioning what to do with it? So this is really very preliminary in that it starts to envision what could be done. So I've talked repeatedly about the great lawn that's shown on here. We have an area there of the mixed use up at the front corner of the site. And then by, again, getting rid of surface parking lots, you now have the opportunity to add new infill, likely residential development. So townhouses, condos, that kind of thing. So that'll lend itself to it, all without encroaching into that exterior perimeter of the site. It allows us to keep that footprint tight within the existing site. So that's something that we were just really at the beginning stages to look at and figure out what makes sense from that. So this is meant to just give you some ideas of where it's headed, but it's by no means the finished product. Tonight is first step. We're putting some things out there based on what we've learned about the site and also based on our experience. Our team has done several hospital redevelopment sites, so we've seen what it takes to take an old institutional facility and turn it into something vibrant. The projects we've worked on have been in tight, dense, higher-end urban neighborhoods like this one. So we have experience in how to get that to integrate, how to get that site to fit into the neighborhood. When hospitals don't really fit in. No offense. They make a lot of noise. They run 24/7. They don't fit in. So how do we convert this into something that's lower density, and instead of kind of keeping its distance from the neighborhood, instead works with the neighborhood? And what kind of amenities can be provided on this site for the neighborhood? So that's part of preliminary analysis that we've done. This is the general schedule. It's going to evolve. As we go through this process, as we engage with the public, it's going to evolve over time. The only thing that we sort of timed out already is that February hearing on the generic environmental impact statement, if we get everything together by then. But that's going to require this input. We can't draft the GIS until we get community input. So that's where we're aiming generally in the schedule. The outcome of that is an idea or a concept for redevelopment that then gets put out for RFPs and participation and feedback by the private development community. So that's our job. Our job is to get it to that stage. Next steps that we have here is continue to go through we call it the inventory analysis. The hospital just ceased operations at the end of the month. We still have to go through the facility, identify what can and can't be reused. I have to continue working through title issues. The survey helps us do that, so we're working through that piece. Frank's team, along with AR, will continue, in particular with the input from tonight, to continue on this master planning concept process, and then the result of that comes back in front of you, both of the GEIS process and other smaller and probably more informal meetings with the community. So that's the parcel of the next part of the process. And then the last part is the implementation part that I've talked about, which is okay, let's get this to a stage or something that we can put out to the development community to solicit responses and participation. So Frank talked a little bit earlier about project websites. The reason we took your information on the way in is so we can reach out to you, give you updates, let you know when meetings are occurring, share information as we develop. I mean, what we have right now with you is what we have today, but that's going to evolve. Then we've got the contacts at the city, as well as Mohawk Valley. So, that's the scope of the presentation. Now, as we said at the start, we want to hear from you guys one-on-one. So, the project team's going to break up. We're going to be in front of boards around the room. Grab any one of us, ask questions, look at the board, ask for details. We're going to be taking notes, so we need your feedback, so we want your input. We also have a board that is sort of an informal poll to hear from you folks about generally the kind of uses that you might like to see on the site. It's not very specific. We're not asking you to sign your name. It's literally a yellow dot. We put it on there. It helps us understand where the community is leaning if we haven't heard from you. But we hope to hear from you. That's why we did it this way. We want to do it one-on-one. This room is terrible for, you can barely hear me. So we want to do this one-on-one and have you folks walk around the room and tap any one of us on the shoulder, even if we're not in front of one of those boards that you have an interest in. If you got a question, we'll do our best to answer it. I know on behalf of the hospital and the city and the IDA, we really appreciate the turnout tonight. We've done meetings where nobody shows up and it doesn't help us. So we're glad to see a robust turnout tonight, and we hope to be able to get engaging with you guys on this going forward. So thank you very much for your patience with us tonight. We appreciate it and look forward to engaging with you guys on